All right, let's just jump right in. Have you ever been in a huge crowd and almost like magic, everyone starts clapping in perfect unison? Or maybe you've seen videos of thousands of fireflies all flashing their lights at the exact same time? You know, that's not just some weird coincidence. It's actually a fundamental principle of the universe, this thing called synchronization. And it is happening literally all around us, from the tiniest cells to the vastness of space.
And that right there, that's the big question we're going to tackle. How does a group of completely independent things, think about it, cells in your heart, neurons in your brain, even planets zipping around the sun, how do they all spontaneously organize themselves into a single, coordinated rhythm? It's this beautiful, deep mystery. And the answer, well, it lies in some really fascinating physics.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at just how universal this pulse really is. Then we'll get into the science of how these systems go from total chaos to perfect coherence. We'll explore the two main ways this can happen, uncover a pretty cool story about a scientific debate, and finally we'll tie it all back to why any of this actually matters in our daily lives. Okay, so first up, this idea of spontaneous order. This has fascinated scientists for a very long time. Pioneers, like the physicist Kuramoto, they developed these elegant models to try and figure out how countless individual oscillators, basically just things with their own rhythm, could suddenly start acting as one. And their work revealed this kind of hidden mathematical language that governs this behavior all throughout nature. This brings us right to the core of the process, that incredible jump from chaos to coherence. So how exactly does a system where everyone is just doing their own thing suddenly lock into a collective rhythm? Well, to really get it, we need to look at the two basic states these systems can be in. On one hand, you've got what's called the incoherent state. The best analogy is a silent disco, right? Everyone's got their own headphones, dancing to a totally different song. It's random, it's messy, it's disordered. But then, on the other side, you have the synchronized state. Imagine the DJ flips a switch, and now one song is blasting for everybody. Suddenly, the entire crowd's movement becomes unified, it's coordinated. The system has literally flipped from a state of low order to high order. And the basic building block for all of this is something called an oscillator. It sounds technical, but it's just a term for anything that has its own natural beat. A single firefly has its own flashing rate. A single neuron has its own firing pattern. They each start out as just an individual doing their own thing. So, what's the secret ingredient that makes them all sync up? It's something called coupling. And you can totally think of this as a kind of peer pressure or communication. The flash of one firefly is seen by its neighbor and influences it. The sound of one person's clap is heard by the person next to them. This coupling is the force that gently, or not so gently, nudges each individual to start paying attention to what everyone else is doing.
Now this leads to a really cool idea. KC, or the critical coupling threshold. See, that peer pressure has to be strong enough to actually work. If the coupling is too weak, if the fireflies are too far apart, or the music is too loud to hear the clapping, everyone just keeps doing their own thing. But once that coupling strength crosses this critical tipping point, KC, the entire system makes a sudden dramatic shift, and boom, just like that, you get synchronization.
But here's the thing, that journey from chaos to order, it's not always a straight line. Depending on the specific properties of the system, it can actually take different routes. Scientists call these routes bifurcations, which is really just a fancy word for a fork in the road, a point where the system has to choose which new state to enter.
And in the models that scientists study, there are two main paths. The first is a steady state bifurcation. This is where everything just locks into a simple, stable, unified rhythm. Think of that crowd clapping in perfect unison. The second one is called a hop bifurcation, and this leads to something way more complex and dynamic, oscillating patterns that actually look like waves. And this is where the story gets really interesting.
Yeah, this whole idea of waves actually kicked off a real scientific debate. We're going to dive into a specific paper from 1993 by a physicist named J.D. Crawford, who took a closer look at what kind of waves actually form after that hop bifurcation. And it's just a fantastic example of how science is supposed to work. It corrects itself and gets more refined over time. So here's the debate in a nutshell. A year before Crawford, in 1992, a group of researchers, Bonilla, New, and Spiegler, they published a model predicting that the system would form traveling waves. But when Crawford ran his own analysis, his calculations pointed to a totally different outcome, standing waves. So who was right? And more importantly, why the difference? The breakthrough, the real aha moment, came when Crawford figured out there was a missing piece in the original puzzle. He essentially argued that the previous model was incomplete.
by not including what he called all the unstable modes. You can think of those as all the possible ways the system could wobble or change. The earlier prediction just wasn't the full picture. Crawford's more comprehensive model revealed that a different, much more stable pattern was the true result.
And this is a brilliant way to see the difference. A traveling wave is exactly like the wave at a football game, right? It's a single pulse of energy that moves all the way through the crowd. But a standing wave, that's something else. It's more like two huge sections of the stadium chanting back and forth at each other. You have two distinct groups, but they're locked in this stable, alternating rhythm.
So the key insight from Crawford's work was huge. In this specific model of all these connected oscillators, the more stable, and therefore the much more likely, outcome is the formation of these standing waves. It's just a perfect example of the scientific method in action. You build on what came before, you refine the math, and you get a clearer, more accurate picture of reality.
Now, I know this can all seem super theoretical, right? Waves and bifurcations, but understanding the physics of synchronization has absolutely massive real-world implications. This isn't just about fireflies. It's about the fundamental rhythm that drives our technology, our biology, and, frankly, our entire world. I mean, think about it. The synchronized firing of millions of neurons in your brain is what allows for consciousness and thought. Your circadian rhythm, your internal body clock, is just a massive system of cellular oscillators keeping you in sync with the 24-hour day. Lasers only work because they force trillions of photons of light to oscillate in perfect unison, and making sure that every single generator on a national power grid stays synchronized is the only thing preventing catastrophic blackouts.
And that leaves us with a pretty cool final thought. The universe is just buzzing with rhythm, from the tiniest cells to the biggest galaxies. And as we get better and better at understanding and even predicting this universal pulse, it opens up some incredible possibilities. We're talking about everything from curing neurological diseases that are caused by faulty brain rhythms to building smarter, more resilient networks. The applications are really just beginning. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will we sync up next?
All right, welcome. So today we're diving into something, well, it's a bit different. Our source material isn't your usual research paper or news article. Nope, it's a protocol. And not just any protocol, it's this incredibly strict, kind of bizarre, but absolutely fascinating set of rules for understanding. You know that feeling, right? We all have it, that drive to not just skim something, but to really get it, to feel like you've got your head wrapped around every single piece of a complex idea. It's a chase for sure. So how do you actually do that? I mean, what would a system for perfect 100% comprehension even look like? Is there some kind of process you could follow that would guarantee you miss absolutely nothing? Well, it turns out there's one, let's call it extreme answer to that question. It's called the unabridged protocol, and it's a system designed to do exactly that, to break down information with a kind of precision that is honestly almost inhuman. Okay, let's get into it. The very first layer of this protocol is all about how you move forward. And the rule is simple. There are no shortcuts. You can't skip around. There is only one super rigid path to follow. So the rules themselves sound pretty simple, but following them, that's absolute. First up, you have to go in a straight line, sentence by sentence. No skimming, no jumping ahead to the exciting parts. Then, after every single paragraph, you stop. You just pause. And then, and this is where it gets really wild, you have to actually say out loud that you've understood everything. Can you imagine the discipline that takes? It forces this incredibly deliberate, almost robotic pace. I mean, just picture it, having this little conversation with yourself, or maybe a study partner, after every single paragraph. This whole completeness check thing is mandatory, and it's there for one reason: to kill any assumptions. It forces you to have total, confirmed understanding before you're even allowed to move on. It's all about being accountable to the text. But it's not just about the order you read in. Oh no, the protocol goes way deeper than that. It demands this insane level of analytical depth for every single word. Yeah, this really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? Think about how we normally read. We kind of skim, we grab the main idea, and we're done. The protocol says absolutely not. You can't do that. Instead, you have to deconstruct the purpose of every sentence. You have to trace its logical connections. You're constantly asking, why? Why is this sentence here? What is its job? It's a completely different way of thinking. And get this, This is how granular we're talking. A simple, everyday word like therefore doesn't just get a pass. No way. The protocol treats it like a tripwire. The second you see it, you have to launch a full-blown investigation into the logic. You have to trace it all the way back. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is taken for granted. Every single connection has to be checked and verified. Okay, so the obsession with precision is already pretty intense, right? But it doesn't stop with just understanding the text. And this next part, honestly, this is the most mind-blowing piece of the whole system. It's not enough to understand it. You also have to say it perfectly. Yeah, it's called the Perfect Pronunciation Protocol, and it's this mandatory, non-negotiable format for speaking complex stuff, like math, out loud. And here's the kicker. The goal isn't just for another person to understand you. The goal is to create a perfect audio file, something a machine could listen to and interpret with absolutely zero ambiguity. So here's how it works. It's a three-part system for every single complex expression. Step 1, you state what you're about to say, to give it some context. Step 2, you show the actual formula, the raw text, for visual clarity. And step 3, you give the exact phonetic vocalization. So you're not just reading math out loud. You're basically creating a perfect script for a computer to read it. And this is the protocol in action. What you're looking at here isn't just a complicated equation. It's the equation, plus its perfect, unabridged audio instruction manual sitting right next to it. That level of extreme, almost obsessive detail, that's not a flaw. That is the entire point of the system. Okay, which brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why on earth would anyone create a system this rigid, this demanding? What's the end game here? What is the point of this almost fanatical pursuit of perfection? And the thing is, the protocol itself never tells you its purpose. That's part of the mystery. So we're left to wonder, what is this thing? Is it a blueprint for a perfect AI tutor, one that can't possibly make a mistake? Or maybe it's just a thought experiment, right? Something to make us think about what understanding really means. It could even be a joke, a satire on how crazy academic requirements can get. Or, and this one is pretty compelling, what if it's a real tool for a field where one tiny mistake could be catastrophic, like rocket science or something? And that brings us to the final really fascinating question here. Let's say you built an AI that could follow these rules perfectly. I mean, flawlessly. Would that machine truly understand the material, or would it just be the world's most perfect mimic, just an amazing program follower with zero real comprehension going on inside? The protocol shows us a potential how for perfect processing, but it leaves us totally hanging on the what. What does it actually mean to understand something anyway? You know that feeling when you finish reading something really dense, only to realize you've kind of absorbed nothing? Well, today, we're going to dive into a radical, almost absurd method designed to make that impossible. It's called the unabridged protocol, and you're about to see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. I mean, come on, we've all been there, right? Staring at a page like this. It's just a wall of text, of symbols, of concepts. You read the words, sure, you even nod along, but deep down, there's that little voice whispering, did I actually get that? Or did I just skim it? So what if there was a way to guarantee perfect, lossless understanding? A method so intense, so ridiculously meticulous that it was physically impossible to miss a single tiny detail. Believe it or not, there's a concept for that. Welcome to the unabridged protocol. Okay, let's break this down. Rule number 1 is the foundation of everything. You cannot skip anything. You have to process the document in a perfectly straight line. Start to finish, page by page, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence. No jumping ahead to the conclusion, no peeking at the summary. It's a one-way trip. But here's where it gets really wild. It's all about time. See, the protocol assumes you have an infinite amount of it. That's why the goal isn't to finish in a certain time. The goal is to spend a minimum of 3 hours on it. It's not about being efficient, it's about being deep. The whole point isn't to finish fast, it's to understand completely. Which, yeah, I know, is kind of hilarious considering we're zipping through this whole concept in about 5 minutes. But that contrast just proves the point, doesn't it? We live in the age of the quick summary, but this protocol, it lives in a totally different universe. So, how do you stop yourself from just, drifting off and passively reading? Well, the protocol has a feature for that, a mandatory error check. After every single paragraph, you have to literally stop and ask yourself, did I miss any nuances here? It forces you to be an active participant and prove you're paying attention before you can move on. Okay, so Rule 1 was about not skipping sections. Rule 2 takes that idea and puts it under a microscope. Now, we're not just reading every sentence, we're dissecting every single word. This is where it goes from careful to, well, downright forensic. Just look at this breakdown. It says it all, right? On the left, you've got normal reading. You skim, you look for keywords, you try to find the main idea. But the protocol over on the right, it's a different game. You don't just read a sentence, you take it apart. You see a simple word like therefore, and you have to stop and trace back the exact logic that led to that conclusion. You're constantly asking not just what, but why. And right when you think it can't possibly get any more intense, we get to Rule 3. Now, this one might be my favorite because it tackles that thing we all do. We just kind of gloss over the math. This rule says, nope, you have to read every single formula out loud, and you have to do it perfectly. There's a rigid 3-step dance for every piece of math. First, you have to say what kind of expression it is. Second, you acknowledge the written code, the LaTex. And third, you have to speak out a full word-for-word phonetic vocalization. No shortcuts. All right, let's give it a shot. Here we have a nonlinear Schrödinger equation. Pretty standard stuff in a physics paper. Normally, your brain just kind of goes, okay, math stuff, and files it away. But with the protocol, you have to say this. Yeah. It's a mouthful, but that's the whole point, isn't it? It's impossible to gloss over a plus or minus sign or a subscript when you're forced to speak every single component into existence. The precision is the purpose. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is insane. This is completely impractical for everyday life, and you're not wrong. But being practical was never the goal here. So what is the point? What's the philosophy behind an approach this extreme? Here's the thing. The unabridged protocol is basically a thought experiment brought to life. The real goal is to achieve perfect, lossless comprehension, to move an idea from the page into your brain with zero data loss. It forces you into this incredibly deep, meticulous way of thinking. And maybe most importantly, it acts as the ultimate rebellion against our modern age of skimming, summarizing, and just looking for the TLDR. So while you and I probably aren't going to be applying the full protocol to our reading list anytime soon, it does leave us with a really powerful question to think about. In a world that's obsessed with speed, what have we gained, and what kind of deep understanding have we traded away for it? Something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.